Andy Harrington, good to see you today. Thank you for joining us.
It's my privilege to be with you, Dave. Thanks for having me.
And to those that are watching, welcome to the Cause Leadership Podcast. Looking forward to our conversation today with Andy. Just as a quick bio, Andy is currently the Executive Director of the Canadian Foodgrains Bank, but he has spent 35 years working in international development and education and youth, and we're looking forward to a great conversation today. So Andy, why don't we just jump right into it? Tell us a bit about your current role and a little bit about Canadian Foodgrains Bank, just so we've got some context.
Well, thanks, Dave. So I get the privilege of being the Executive Director for Canadian Foodgrains Bank. We're an association of 15 different members from a Christian faith-based background, working to end global hunger. That's kind of our mission. Our vision isn't a world without hunger. We're one of the Canadian government's lead charities, one of their only ones in terms of food security around the world. So we work around the world. Last year we were operational in 35 countries. We work through our members and their partners on the ground. So we tend to be very localized in terms of the work we do, all based around food security. So part of that is humanitarian response in times of crisis. So places like Gaza, Afghanistan, Sudan, Somalia, Yemen, and other places that are facing either climate-induced or conflict-induced or economic disruption for whatever reason that's causing emergency levels of hunger. The other one is longer-term sustainable development, so really looking to build on countries' agriculture systems and to make them more ready to face disasters that might happen in the future and to build resilience there. We also do a lot of work here in Canada in terms of building public awareness around the need to be engaged globally in the fight against hunger. So that's kind of what we do, very much based around working with our local partners for our many members and really doing everything we can to meet the needs of approximately about 1 million people a year.
Wow, that's amazing. Incredible work. And you've done some other incredible work too. So tell us a little bit just about your career in general. I know you, obviously you're not from Canada, you're from the UK originally, but have worked significantly with youth, at-risk youth. You've been leader of a group in Canada that did that as well, working with youth in the Vancouver area. But you also were involved in being the CEO of Wellspring, which is the education in Central and East Africa. That's quite a journey. Just curious, how did you get into the charitable sector? What kind of initiated that for you? And then we can talk about how you moved into leadership roles as well.
Well, first of all, Dave, I should tell you this accent is fake. It just gets me invited to more parties. It also makes me sound about 30 points higher on my IQ. So really, I'm actually a native New Yorker.
Okay.
No.
Gotcha.
No. So yeah, it's been a long career. Started in the late 80s. Basically, when I left school, I ended up working in the City of London in a pretty decent job for a group called Lloyd's Underwriters, and had a career all mapped out. But for a variety of reasons, just didn't feel that was the way I wanted to go. I was early 20s, lugging around a briefcase full of files that, and signing things for millions of dollars and thinking, what am I doing here? Major imposter syndrome. And also, I'm not sure this is what I want to do with my life. I could be retired at 40 with a good income, and I'm not sure I want that. So I ended up, I went back to university, got a degree in international relations, thinking that would be an area I'd get into. But actually, while I was there, really became involved in social issues. And so ended up working for a Christian organization called Youth Unlimited, and worked out on the streets of a city called Lincoln. So working council estates and working with kids that from a real low income background, kids that would be marginalized by society. And so we'd be sitting on garden walls or in youth clubs or whatever. We had and ended up doing quite a lot of interesting work over those years. And that led me into really engaging quite a lot in the social issues in the UK at the time. And for a strange series of events, I ended up, leading a bunch of initiatives and then being asked in the middle of nowhere if we would move to, my wife and I and our 2 kids would move to Bosnia and Croatia during the war that was on there, because there was a real need to work with traumatized young people. And most importantly, there was a need to train up leaders to work with traumatized young people through that war. So we absolutely said, no, we're not doing that. We've got 2 young kids, and then found ourselves there 9 months later.
Wow. Yeah.
Just didn't really feel that we had a choice. And so spent a couple of years in the middle of the war there, which was incredibly exciting at one level and incredibly awful at another level.
Must have been.
But that really engaged me more in the international side of the needs that people have around the world. So came back to the UK for 3 years, headed up a national youth agency, but really felt, no, I've seen enough of the world to know there's more. And actually ended up moving to Vancouver in Canada in 1999, which seems like yesterday to me, but it seems a long time ago when I say that. It's 25 years.
I know, it's amazing.
And became the executive director of an organization called Greater Vancouver Youth Unlimited, which is a brilliant organization, and worked right across the kind of sector of youth work. So it worked internationally in places like Rwanda. It also worked locally. It worked in the downtown east side, which is, generally known as one of the most impoverished parts of North America. Its strapline is the worst postcode in North America. So did a lot of work there. Our organization did a lot of work there on the streets and in drug rehab and various other things. And as I went through that process of working there and really engaging and leading an amazing team, which is one of the largest youth teams in Canada. Youth Unlimited used to be called Youth for Christ. It's an international organization, and at that time we were the largest chapter in the world. So very, very variegated type of work. But as part of that, one of the things I really believed is that it was important to show young people here in Canada, even though they felt that they were very deprived, and many of them really were in a Canadian context, that there was always something worse. So we engaged with a number of works around the world. One in particular was Rwanda. So we joined a kind of sister organization in Rwanda, would take young people out there to work alongside Rwandan young people, supported a lot of work in education and schooling, and working with widows from the genocide and various other things. And I began to be really convinced that this was something we needed to expose ourselves more to in Canada. To cut a long story short, I ended up spending a lot of my time on that one particular project, and was asked I came across Wellspring, which was the Wellspring Foundation for Education, was very engaged there. They built a great school as a model for what education could look like in a post-genocide country. They were starting to branch out into working in the public education system, which was in some need at that time. And I ended up going on their board, and then after one very amazing coffee that I had with one of the founders, was founded by 2 young guys, brilliant guys, Richard Taylor and Jeff Coleman, wonderful human beings. They asked me if I would consider actually quitting my job, leading this wonderful organization, doing these incredible things around the world. And at that time, I was kind of speaking all over Canada and everything. And would I become the CEO of this little startup that was just getting going, didn't have an office, and had 4 staff in Canada at the time. And I remember going home to my wife, Helen, and saying, hey, you'll never guess what they've asked today. And saying, it would mean, stepping back, massive pay cut, everything else. And she looked at me and she said, well, you love Rwanda. You're looking for a new challenge. You really believe in international development work, and you really like these guys. Are you stupid? Of course you should take it.
Not what you expect.
Not what you'd expect, but that's Helen for you. And so ended up spending 8 years there, 8 wonderful years at Wellspring. Lived in Canada, but would travel to Wellspring headquarters in Rwanda very often. So I spent about a quarter to a third of every year in Rwanda, roughly, it depended on the year. Did some really fun things as part of that. Ended up riding my motorbike from Cape Town up to Kigali to raise funds for them, which is a 10,000 kilometer trip through 10 African countries. Climbed Kilimanjaro to raise funds. So we were kind of a creative, fun way of doing things. But the most important thing was we really began to see this incredible change in education, not just in Rwanda, but in surrounding countries as well. An incredible team doing amazing things. And to bring that story home, about 5 years ago, we suffered a family tragedy. Our son was injured in an accident and sadly died a week later. So it kind of brought everything into this place of question and what are we doing with our life? And we basically said for a year we won't make a big decision on anything. But halfway through that year, I was approached about the Canadian Foodgrains job, which is an amazing job. Canadian Foodgrains in our sector is extremely well respected. We're Canadian Charity Impact Top 10, Charity Intelligence Top 10 Impact Charity. It's, as I say, it's the government's lead partner in terms of food security. It's us and the World Food Programme. An incredible history of support in rural Canada from what we call our growing projects, hundreds of farms that support us. And I said, no, I don't feel it's the right thing for me. I don't feel I could give leadership at this time in my life with what we're going through.
Sure, yeah.
When that year, we had decided we wouldn't do anything for a year, take a big decision. Wellspring had been wonderful to us. They gave us time. But at the end of that year, I was feeling, okay, I think it's time for a new challenge. And the very day I had that conversation with Helen, I ended up in a conversation with the search team as well, saying, look, would you reconsider? And I thought, that's weird.
Yeah.
And so went through the process and took the role on 4 years ago, and haven't looked back. It's an incredible organization and doing amazing things. So that's kind of a little bit of my journey. There's lots of different side tracks I could take on that, but that I wanted to be in a place that was making the most impact that I could possibly make, and I feel that Canadian Foodgrains Bank is doing that.
Yeah. Well, and it just sounds like everything is built, every opportunity that you've led is built on the other and prepared you for what you're doing. So that's amazing as well. Andy, from the perspective of, Canadian Foodgrains Bank is a charity, obviously, and the organizations that you've led have been charities. Looking at the charitable sector today, and the state of the world, frankly, I mean, it's such a significant time in many places around the world, and war-torn countries, and food security, and all of those things are very prevalent and sadly relevant. They're too relevant today, I think, for many people. But when you look at the charitable sector and leadership in it, what concerns you, or what do you see as opportunities? I mean, I'm happy to address it from both sides.
I think one of the biggest concerns I have is that for many years, the charitable sector and those of us who are doing work in that were quite respected in terms of the population. So people who would say we're working in international food security or working in education or health or whatever it might be, you kind of got a free pass. It wasn't always the right thing, but you kind of got a free pass to say, oh, you're a good person doing good things.
Yeah.
And I think there was a lot of credibility for that. And I think much of that is still there. But the other side of it has been, sadly, that with what we're seeing in the breakdown in civil discourse in society, with the politicization of issues that in the past were seen as, held in common ground, I think many charitable institutions have come under a lot of pressure. For example, the politicization of things like climate change, the politicization of things like Gaza and various other things. These are political issues, but they're also human issues. And so, and that's just two. I could pick many others. Sure. Alongside that, you've seen there have been some breakdowns in how charities have been run, certain charities, and that has kind of tarnished the work from many of us right across the sector. We're put under a lot of pressure to say, do you have a low overhead than others? And I happen to work for an organization that does, but I think that's a terrible metric to look at in terms of judging a charity. If you're a charity that, for example, one I used to be involved in, Wellspring, its primary thing is training teachers. You don't have a lot of infrastructure. You don't have a lot of, specific projects where you're giving money away. You're training teachers. So you have a fairly, you've got to employ teacher trainers. So your overhead can look really high. We should be measuring the impact and not the overhead. So I think there are many things that are challenging the kind of landscape of charities at the moment. There's also the demographics that are happening. In Canada and right across the West, as our population ages, we have a population that grew up in terms of being generous and of being givers. And I think there's a younger generation that wants to do that and really wants to engage in the issues, but they don't have the giving capabilities that an older generation had. So right now we're seeing a bulge on that. It's a good time for many charities that have been around for a while, because we've got people having a lot of income and a lot of wealth that are looking to transfer some of that wealth. But that's a short-term thing. So I think we need to be thinking carefully in the future about how that continues. So I think really it comes down to me, the breakdown of much of civil society and our sense of the common good. There was a well-held core belief in society that we need to stand with those who don't have what we have. And I think that's still there in many sectors of the population, but it's being challenged in others.
Yeah.
So those would be some of the challenges. I could go on, but in terms of opportunities, let me, I'm going to flip that coin, especially as we talk about generations. We have a younger generation that wants to be engaged.
Yeah.
And by younger, I'm not talking, 12 and 13-year-olds. I'm talking people into their 30s, 40s, even 50s,
Yeah.
who've come up in a different paradigm and have looked at the world and said, I actually want to engage in this. I don't just want to give my money. I want to give my time. I want to give my efforts.
Mm-hmm.
I want to be engaged in advocacy. One of the things that we do at Canadian Foodgrains Bank, which is a wonderful thing, is we take people to Ottawa twice a year. We take under 30s earlier in the year, and then anyone can come later in the year. And they meet alongside our staff with MPs and ministers.
Okay.
They'll attend question time, and they talk about the need that Canada has to engage around the world, particularly in areas of food insecurity, but really in terms of seeing humanitarian and longer term work built, resilience built, so that we can see a better world. So people are really engaged in that and coming on board with that. And we think that's really important to see, to really tap into that sense of we want to see justice. We don't want just words. We don't want to just write a check. Yeah. We want to be engaged in the issues.
Based on what you've just been saying about the donor population, we're noticing, we're in the largest leadership transition that the charitable sector has faced, literally probably in decades. And so we're seeing boomers moving towards retirement. We're seeing Gen X perhaps not available in the numbers that we need in order to be the leadership replacement for many of the boomers that are leaving. And yet we have the same group that's very energized by social justice and some of the issues around the world are really our greatest hope for the future of leadership in the charitable space. Mm-hmm. And so not only as donors and not only as advocates, but how do we get that 20-something, 30-something interested in the charitable sector, compensate them appropriately, have a career track that kind of allows them to really embrace some of the leadership opportunities that are coming at us fast, and we as a sector really need to be prepared for that. Your thoughts on some of that?
Yeah, it's a great question, Dave. It's something that I've been very engaged in all through my life. I used to run an emerging leadership program. I've helped plant 2 leadership schools, and so I really, really believe in a new generation coming through. And I think it comes down to 3 things, and there's all sorts of subsets to them.
Yeah.
But the first one is to give people opportunities. So I think we always, as leaders, have to be finding a way to give away what we have, or to give access, to make open doors into the organizations that we have. So one of the things we've done, certainly in the secretariat at Canadian Foodgrains Bank, Canadian Foodgrains Bank is because it's an association, there are all these different parts of it. The part that I head up is the kind of secretariat that kind of looks at all the operational aspects of this. And we've done a lot of work to try and embrace and bring on board younger leaders. And so we've had, as well as having our that program I told you about where we're taking people to Ottawa, it's kind of a end of a open funnel for us. We're looking to see, okay, how can we engage people in the program? And either that could be coming on staff, but it could also be coming ambassadors for us, giving people the training, the ability. We don't just drop them down in an office there. We give them 3 days of training to say, this is how we talk to MPs. This is how we engage in political advocacy. This is how we communicate. So for us, that's kind of an open funnel just on that one stage, in terms of saying, let's find ways to specifically work with a new generation as they come through. So I think that's the first one, is you've got to find doors in. So that can be in a staff position. We've taken on some young staff recently who are really ripping it up, or finding ways, if you don't have a salary position, to say, come and engage with us, become part of the family.
Yeah.
So that would be one. I think the second one would be, it's really important that as, whether we're a leader or whatever role we're in, we don't just look at a resume or a job description in terms of those years of experience you have, or that academic qualification that you have. One of the things I already believe in is thinking outside the box when we're looking for the right people. Yeah. Who are people who are interested? One of the questions I always want to ask is, are you an interest? I never say this loud, but inside I'm thinking, are you an interesting person? Do you have a lot of interesting life experience? And so we're trying to make space for those people who wouldn't necessarily have gone through all of the ways that we did it, prove they've got 15 years of experience. We need, when we're looking for people to come into more senior positions, yes, but in those starter positions, trying to find interesting people who we think will want to take a risk on, because that would be my third thing, taking a risk.
Yeah.
I think that if we play safe, I mean, it's very interesting, isn't it, that we're in a time when we're looking at political leaders that are wanting to cling on to power in all sorts of different ways and in all sorts of different countries.
Yeah.
I think we need to take a risk on a new generation and believe that they have what it takes to take us forward.
Yeah.
So that would be, it's finding those doors. It's looking for the interesting people who can say, well, I may not have all the experience, but look at what I've got here.
Yeah.
And it's taking a risk and having trust that they'll come through. I mean, what can go wrong in that? Well, there are some things that can go wrong, but they're all fixable, right? I can figure some things that can go wrong, but they're all fixable. So I think we have to trust that there is a generation that actually knows more than we do on some of these things, and to give them the opportunities to come forward.
Yeah, and I'm so glad to hear your response to that. Just when you look at the younger generation that's coming up, the interesting ones, but what are you hearing from them? What are they looking for? Because I think there's a lot of emerging leaders, but it's really important that they're finding what they need from a career perspective as well. So I'm just curious, what are you hearing from them?
Well, I think that's a very interesting question. And obviously, we tend to think of any block as a monolithic block. So I hear different things from different people. So trying to condense those around.
Yeah.
I think the first one I'd say is flexibility, especially in a post-COVID world.
Yeah.
That whole, we will do this work for 10 years, we'll come in on the 9 to 5, we'll fill in the boxes and all that. That's not where people are at.
Right.
So I think the first one would be we've got to find flexibility. And I actually think that it's now extending, because of COVID largely, that is now extending beyond the new generation. I think everybody's looking for that level of flexibility. So it's finding ways to, if you found the right person, it's finding ways not to say you have to fit with us, but it's we have to fit together. Yeah, we have certain parameters and standards, but we can be flexible. You do as well, you can be flexible. So the first one I think would be flexibility, not just saying this is the cookie cutter, this is how we do it.
Yeah.
I think the second thing is people want is authenticity. They want to see authenticity in their organization, in their leaders, and they want to show authenticity themselves. This is not, there are less and less people turning up in suits and ties and trying to be something that they're not. More and more people saying, this is who I am. I want to fit in with you, but I'm not going to let these things go. So, and I love that, by the way. I think people who know themselves are some of the best people that I've ever worked with. So that would be that. I think the third one is trust. I think we have, Lencioni obviously talks about this and others do as well, but trust is the foundation for any good organization. Yeah. And I think there are largely, perhaps because of the way that we've treated media, perhaps the way social media has worked, perhaps because of some of the, ways in which we view meta narratives, big truths anymore, and the cynicism we have about that, conspiracy theories or whatever. I think people are coming in with more questions than they used to. It was like they're not coming into an organization and saying, we'll give you everything, we believe you're great. They want to see it. Yeah. So it's showing people that what we talk about is true, as opposed to just the strap line on the website. And it's building the trust in them so that they can, because I found when, especially with younger people, when they give their trust, they really give their trust, but you have to earn it. Yeah. It's ethics, it's morality, it's everything that goes with that. One final thing I'll say, and I would say this for everyone, one of the things I've realized in life is that encouragement is incredibly important.
Absolutely.
It's a superpower of a leader. And I'm always amazed at the stories I've heard of people who just say, well, I never got encouragement in my job. I was never asked. I mean, there's an international sign that says someone needs encouragement, and that is that they're breathing. Yeah. And I really do believe that I would much rather over-encourage than under-encourage. Not encourage where it's not deserved, but over-encourage rather than under-encourage. I'm often accused, you're always over-nice, you're always over-encouraging. I don't think I am. I would much rather be accused of that than saying, man, you never thank people or you never do anything for people.
So related to that, you've got donors that are currently giving at a significant amount, but as you said, we're starting to lose them. We're losing some of our executive leadership. we're also losing some of our board leadership for the same
Mhm.
reasons, just aging out in many respects. And so back to that younger generation, how do we get them involved in volunteer board roles as well? Because I think from a diversity perspective, um, and then, part of that is age and gender and culture. Uh, I think the Canadian landscape of board members is a bit homogeneous at the moment, if I can put
Yeah.
it that way.
No, I think that's a fair comment.
Yeah. So how do we encourage folks to get involved at the board level and provide the governance that we're needing for our charities across the country?
Again, a great question, Dave. Just to let you know a little bit about how our board works, because it's a little bit different from most boards.
Okay.
So with the 15 members that we have one representative from each member sitting on the board. And some
Okay.
of those are senior staffs. They may be CEO of the organization. So some of these are large organizations,
Yeah.
MCC, World Renew,
Yeah.
Salvation Army Tier Fund. So some of them may be CEOs or senior staff. Others would be representatives. They would be. We have a mix so that we actually have a formula. So you have a mix so that we have, representatives from the population at large, and so a lot for us depends on who a member would put forward. But we've had a couple of younger members that have put forward onto our board of directors that are just fantastic.
Right.
They're not scared to speak up.
Mm-hmm.
They listen well. They have a different viewpoint in terms of their understanding of how culture works.
Mm.
So I think the first thing we've got to do is to make sure that we understand that we should be actively looking, as opposed to seeing who
Yeah.
knocks on the door, but actively looking for a diversity in our board of directors. And I think that extends beyond generation, actually. I think that's the wider sense of what diversity and equity means.
Absolutely.
But I've certainly found I've worked with boards now for over 35 years. I've certainly found that when we take the opportunity to invite younger people onto our boards, that has almost entirely always been a really positive thing. That they would be much more likely to come out and get involved in some of that work I was talking about on the streets of Lincoln 35 years ago. We had young board directors who are coming out and being engaged, and then they can speak a lot more actively on the board about the work that's going on.
Right.
So I think you're exactly right. I think we do have a fairly homogenous approach to board directorship. I do believe it's beginning to change.
Yeah.
But I think the more we can engage young people in the actual governance side of what we do, and also ask them to be engaged in the working side of what we do, we get a much more impactful and effective board of directors. And in the same way we talk about that in the context of charitable giving, if we don't do that, we are heading for a brick wall.
Yeah.
So tell me what the choice is. We have to engage with younger people. And like I said earlier, younger people really, really want, they want to see things work. They don't want to just be talking or giving, or they want to be engaged in the work. So I think a board is actually a really great way of helping your organization and bringing through leaders as well at the same time.
Yeah, absolutely. You went to Sri Lanka after the tsunami, and you engaged in leadership from the humanitarian response side. And, obviously this was a crisis situation. Now, not every domestic charity is facing the same kind of crisis situation as that, but there are many things that come out of that: building trust, certainly, identifying the priorities, dealing with the crisis, caring for the team, coping with stress. These are all things that are, I would say, existent in charities here domestically, but perhaps not into the same depth of crisis as a tsunami would bring. But those are sort of key elements when dealing with an organization in crisis. What, as you reflect as a CEO, executive director, and you reflect on that, on the crisis that some organizations are facing, how do you develop trust and keep trust and provide for a team during that period of time?
I would say there are actually some parallels with things that I experienced in Sri Lanka, and also in Bosnia during the war there, and here in Canada. And my work does encompass levels of crises around the world at the moment.
Yeah, it would.
So I think just to go back to that experience or to some of the other experiences, you are living on the extreme at a time like that. That in the Sri Lanka situation, I got a call probably 3 days after the tsunami happened, saying we would like you to be on a plane and head up the humanitarian efforts for our worldwide organization there. I think that was based on my experience in Bosnia and Croatia and what I'd done there.
Sure.
And so jumped on a plane, was there a week afterwards, had one person who came with me. He was a guy called Dave. He was not a worker. He was a volunteer in our work, but had served some time in the military and had a lot of logistics background.
Okay.
And so we literally got off a plane, walked into an absolute crisis. We walked through the airport in Sri Lanka, just being bombarded by boxes coming off of Hercules and C-17s, and just trying to think what are we going to do here? So we had to formulate, meet a whole brand new bunch of people, only one of whom I'd ever met before, and form a team and really engage in a strategic, efforts in the first 2 days to try and work out what are we going to do. And what we actually decided to do was, for the purposes of that team, which had been engaged in social work with youth, is get schools up and running again. And so we got schools up and running within 4 weeks for 25,000 children. Wow. Supplied everything that those schools needed to be running, and everything that the kids needed in terms of food, clothing, supplies and everything. And so what I learned from that, and what I think happens here, is that you not only have to care for the mission and what you need to do. We had to care for the team that was struggling with that. Some of the people who were doing that had lost their houses.
Yeah.
They had lost family members. They were themselves in crises, and here we are trying to orient them to meet the needs of these tens of thousands of kids in crisis. If you don't care about the person that's doing that, A, I don't think you're a very good human being.
Right.
But B, you are not going to get to where you need to get to. So we had a parallel effort, really working to say, how can we help the team that's helping the people?
Yeah.
I think that's a critical thing that we need to do as we think about the work in charities. Charitable work is generally not easy.
Right.
Yeah. It's not the best paid. Mm-hmm. We're living in a cost of living crisis, so people come under pressure there. You're often dealing with people in crisis themselves. Yeah. You don't just go home and shut that down at 5 p.m. So we have to have care for people. So let me give you a couple of examples of where I'm seeing that. We had we're currently we work at 2 levels. So we're working on the ground for our members and their partners. Yeah. And so one of the things that we're starting to build into our funding is to make sure that we give mental health care support for the people on the ground, making sure they can get out of the situations. I literally just returned from Rwanda last week, or week before last, and met with teams from the DRC as well that are really engaged in some very difficult work. In fact, 2 days after we left, there was an attack on an aid convoy, and it wasn't our staff, but 2 staff of Tier Fund, DRC, were killed in that attack. Those are people that we're associated with. Okay. We have had that happen to us as well. We have to find ways to care for staff like that. So we're finding ways to build into budget mental health support, psychosocial support, time out, making sure that we are there, that there are emergency protocols in place. So for the staff on the ground, we're trying to do that. For the staff that are supporting them, such as our staff in Winnipeg, where our office is, or elsewhere around the country, or for member staff that I know our members have their own procedures as well, sure. We're often kind of on the tail end of that dog getting wagged, but it does get wagged. Yeah. And so we're wanting to make sure that we give our staff the time they need, the support they need, the personal development that they need. So we're starting to build more into more budget lines around those kind of support things in order to help people. Yeah. So there are practical things you can do. We have policies around that. Let me just say this as well, though. As a leader, you've got to be aware of that. Yeah. And that's where the pulse check of an organization comes in. We haven't covered this yet, Dave, but the primary thing I believe my role is about is supporting the team. I actually think I'm the least important person in our team. So, but my job is to make sure they have what they need. Right. That's at every level. It's compensation, it's benefits, it's ways in which we structure job descriptions, it's ways in which we care for our staff. Yeah. It's learning to laugh together. When I was, that trip I've just on, we had a 10 staff members. It was 10 new staff members. One of the things I believe in our organization is that every single staff member in every support role, no matter what you are, should go and visit the projects in the field within the first 18 months of when they're there. That's something that Food Grains has held for a while that I really believe in.
Yeah.
So we had 10 new staff that came along, seeing some very difficult things and also some very wonderful things, but making sure that we made friends with each other as well, and we supported one another. So as a leader, you have to do that. You've got to be checking on where your staff are at, where your team is at, and you've got to be making sure they have what they need. So you can have all the policies and all the support, and we try and have all that. But if you've not got your finger on the pulse and you're not sure who needs what, they're not always going to come to you. Sometimes you have to go and say, hey, where are you at? I'm very lucky. We have an amazing leadership team that have their fingers on the pulse as well, and a good management team that work with them as well. But it's having those things in place, but it's making sure that you use them.
Yeah. You remind me of a mutual friend, I'm sure, Chris Wignall, who does some leadership.
No, Chris will.
And Chris talks about celebrating. And I think that's really important for organizations to do. It's
Chris is a mutual friend. I have a lot of respect for Chris, and I've learned a lot from him over the years. And we actually had him come speak to our whole staff about 2 months ago.
Okay.
And he talked about celebration. We try and do that. We're not good enough yet.
Right.
One of the things in our organization is we run very fast, and we have 125 odd projects a year, and so we can run from one to the next to the next.
Yeah.
And we need sometimes to stop and say, "Hey, that was good.
Yeah,
that was good."
Yeah. I appreciate your comments about being the CEO and being the least important and being making sure that the team is looked after. But how do you look after yourself? How do you? How does Andy get cared for?
I should invite my wife into this conversation right now, because she probably has a very different perspective from me. I feel I'm a very lucky, blessed man. We live, it's not off grid where we live, but it's close to it. We live right out in the forest on the mountains. And so when I come home from work, or when I step out of this basement I'm currently in, I travel a lot.
Yeah.
But I have a home office. I go out and I chop wood. Or I try and keep work with the forest, or I try and make sure the rabbits aren't eating the zucchinis.
Okay.
So a part of it is nature for me. So that's the wider context. So a lot of self-care for me happens in the midst of nature and creation, and hiking and riding my motorbike down incredibly gnarly trails. So finding things that stretch me. I think the other thing is having good people around me. I have great friends. I'm very lucky with the friend group I have. I'm really lucky that I'm still really great friends with people in the UK where we left 25 years ago. Regularly go home and see them. And it's also accountability. So I have a couple of people I hold myself accountable to, but I like to think, and if they were here, they might say, "Oh no," but I like to think we're accountable as a team together as well. And so I have a couple of people on our team whose job it is sometimes to point the finger at me and say, you're saying all these things, but where have you taken vacation, Andy? You're taking a day off. And a good board that does that as well. So I tend to be fairly energetic. I'm not one of those people that just needs to work a 9 to 5 day. Sometimes it will go a lot longer than that. But I am good at, when I switch off, I switch off.
Yeah.
And with my wife, my daughter, and others, we find ways to enjoy this incredible place that we live, and that's my way of doing it. It's an interesting thing. I've been starting to wonder, what does life after work look like? I don't know when that happens. It'll be some time yet, I think. But how will this work? Do I define myself by this job, or do I define myself by the fact that I'm Andy Harrington and a human being, and I live in this world? And so it is an interesting question of how you switch off. I think there's a lot of connotations to it.
I don't think you're going to retire by the sounds of it, Andy. So.
I don't think I am. Yeah, my wife's pretty sure you're right on that one, Dave. I'm not entirely sure what that looks like for me.
Okay. You just gave some great examples of what works for you. What would be your advice to other CEOs who maybe aren't practicing self-care to the degree that they need to, or aren't in a situation where they have the support? Any thoughts for that CEO, executive director?
Well, I'll say what I said to someone recently. You're probably not doing as well as you think you are. One of my things that I enjoy doing is sitting with other people in, not just in this sector, but people who are in leadership, and asking them questions. And so when I was in a conversation recently with someone saying, well, I'm doing all this and I'm doing all that, and I'm working 60, 70 hours a week. And so I immediately stopped them there and said, and is that helping? Are you doing as well as you think you are?
Yeah.
Because I think we can find our value from the hours that we put in and the efforts that we make in a way that is actually quite artificial. So the first piece of advice I always give to anyone is take time for you.
Yes.
If you don't take time for you and you're not in top condition, how can you care for other people? Sooner or later, they will become burdens to you and they'll become a problem rather than what they should be, which is an amazing, unique individual doing a big thing. So the first thing you've got to do is take time for you. And I think that can work different for different people.
Yep.
You know, my way is jump out on the bike and get out into the middle of nowhere, or go hike a mountain, or go for a swim. Others, it might be read a book. Oh, it's also reading a book for me, but others, it might be reading a book, or, you know, binge watching an Apple TV show, or, you know, whatever it might be. But the first thing is you've got to take time. I want to be careful how I say this. The words balanced lifestyle aren't ones that always sit well with me, because lifestyle isn't always balanced. You get this picture of someone who's able to just balance on that rope all the time. Well, we often fall off the rope, but the question is, what are you going to do when you fall off the rope? How are you going to heal? Are you just going to jump straight back on, or are you going to take time? So that would be my main thing is take time for you, have interests outside. We have learned this the hard way, bearing in mind what I said earlier about what happened a few years ago. Take time with your family. That time doesn't come back. Take time with your friends. You'll be better for it. I would rather do 6 hours of work where I'm really energized than 10 hours of work where I'm just dragging my backside around. And so it's taking time. There's many other things that I took a long time on that one.
No, that's good. No, thank you. So related to leadership, you've done some transitions over the course of your career. One of them was taking over from a couple of founders you mentioned at Wellspring. How does a CEO or executive director transition well? What does that look like? And what in your own experience, how has that worked well?
I think that's a great question, Dave. And I think there's two aspects to that. It's what you're leaving and what you're taking on. So I've always tried to leave organizations well. I've always tried to leave organizations better than I found them. And I've been very lucky in that I've inherited leadership I haven't moved around that much, to be honest. I spent 13 years at YSE, 8 years at, actually 20 years at YSE in different positions, and 8 years at Wellspring. I mean, 4 years here, and I don't expect to be leaving shortly. So I think it's leaving well. So it's making sure that you don't leave loose ends. So, and that for me has practically been evidenced in making sure that I'm not leaving a financial disaster for the people that are following me on, especially in a charitable place. Some of the places I've taken on, it has been difficult, but it's making sure that I know this person who's taken over from me is going to have the time to learn the job without having to go straight out and go, oh my gosh, I've got to raise $100,000 in the next 10 days or we're skunked. It's also leaving the relationships well. I think one of my favorite achievements is the fact that I'm still really good friends with people in every organization that I've worked for, every single one.
That's amazing.
And I think that's a wonderful thing. Someone told me a long time ago, when you're a leader, you can't really be friends with the people that you lead. And I have spent a career disproving that. So I think everything is about relationships. So leaving those relationships well. So that's the leaving side, just making, I remember standing up in 2012 and telling the team at Youth Unlimited I was leaving and bursting into tears in front of them all and being so embarrassed. But that's how much I cared about them, so it's leaving it well. So that would be that. The second one is really know what you're entering. I think one of the biggest mistakes that leaders make when they enter into something is thinking they're going to be the savior.
Right.
You've got to diagnose the nature of the organization that you're coming into. So I've been very, very lucky coming into Canadian Foodgrains Bank in an organization that was been extremely well led by my predecessor, Jim Cornelius, that has a great history with all these people across Canada that have supported it. We have this wonderful roots in agricultural Canada, in farming Canada, that is still very strongly there. Of knowing that there's been a great team doing it. If I'd come in and said, okay, right, I'm going to change you all around because, we got to right this ship. I've watched leaders do that with very successful organizations and wreck them. My attitude is on this particular role was to, wow, I'm stewarding something. And we need to adjust to the times as everybody does, but what a great place to start from. So in other places that have been turned around, it's being aware of what needs to be turned around. It's not necessarily everything that needs to be turned around. You can come in and destroy people if you're not careful.
Absolutely.
So I think that transition is about listening and learning. So I have a basic formula which says this: the first 3 months, just listen. Try not to make any decisions. There's always some that come at you. You don't have a choice. But do everything you can not to make any. The second 3 months, carry on doing that, but start processing. What have you learned and how does that apply? When you get into your 6 to 9 months period, you start to step out and start to say, okay, here are some things I think we need to consider.
Okay.
And in your 9 to 12 month period, you start putting some foundations in place. But really, you shouldn't be making huge shifts unless there is an absolute crisis in your first year in leadership. And so that's kind of how I tried to do things here at Canadian Foodgrains Bank, which is a really interesting model because we're membership led as well. We've seen some significant changes built on all the success that went before over the last 4 years. We've seen our funding has increased from about 45 million up to 85 million in that time.
Wow.
And there's been some changes there that have happened, largely driven by membership and others.
Okay.
Our team has expanded, our program portfolio has expanded. If I'd have come in at the beginning and said, we're going to do this in the first year, I would have wrecked it.
Yeah.
So know what you're entering, identify its strengths and weaknesses, but take your time and listen. That is absolutely critical. And so those leaders who just want to come in and make a splash in the first 3 months generally do make a splash. It's just not the right kind of splash.
Right. Yeah, no, that's good. Just final question as we come towards the end here, Andy. Younger leaders desiring to take on more senior leadership opportunities, potentially to be an executive director or CEO at some point in their career, often need leadership development, but perhaps more pointedly need mentorship and desire it and are looking for mentors. In your experience, in your own career, how have you found mentors and perhaps how have you been a mentor?
Great question, Dave. I'll start with the how I found. I've been very lucky. I had some great people around me over the years. So the first person, when I started working those council estates and streets in Lincoln, I had a great leader called Pete Crosby. Not a particularly well-known guy, but my gosh, did he teach me some stuff. And I often find myself even now saying, how would Pete handle that? He taught me about the uniqueness of individuals. He taught me about the little things. Pay attention to the little things. Yeah. One story he told me, and we were working with, kids who, often from dysfunctional family backgrounds. He told me the story of hearing that some of the kids were going to go off on a day trip from Lincoln to Nottingham, and they were going to take a train, and the train was going to go early. So he got up, took his dog, walked to a level crossing just so that he could wave to them as they went past.
Yeah, wow.
That's actually one of the best leadership lessons I've ever heard in my life.
Mm-hmm.
So it's finding. I've been very lucky that I've had people like that. I had when I was a young person, I had a youth leader called Phil, or two youth leaders called Phil and Jill Blackledge, and they were very into mentoring, and they intentionally mentored me without telling me. They only told me about 10 years later that they were doing it.
Is that right?
But they saw things in me. I was, you wouldn't have thought of me as you would have thought of me as a leader, but not in the right way. So they took the time to really, they said, "Hey, do you want to come to work for the day? You're on school holidays at the moment, or university holidays. You want to come to work for the day and sit in the truck with me?" And just those intentional moments. So I've been very lucky in those leaders around, and that has continued. I now have peer leaders that I look to. Another one of my responsibilities is I co-chair the Humanitarian Coalition. I'm on the board for that, which is a group of leading development and aid agencies around that come together in time of emergency to respond on behalf of Canada. And I have really learned from the other CEOs that I sit alongside there, just really great people that I'm constantly thinking, man, I should try that. I should do that. I've been very lucky to be around.
That's great.
To your second question around mentoring, for some reason or other, I've been very blessed that there's been a bunch of people that I've been able to travel with over the years. And I'm at a stage in my life now where I can see how they're doing really well. Some of them are moving into fairly senior CEO leadership at the moment.
That's great.
And it's just a joy to see that happen. And so I think the most important thing for me is being available.
Yeah.
So as life has got busier, I've always tried to keep that space where someone says, well, can I just go and have a cup of coffee and ask you some questions, especially young people? It's to find and do that. one of my friends on the humanitarian coalition's a lady called Lindsay Glasgow. She heads up Plan.
Okay.
She is brilliant. I just watched her a couple of times, just working with young people and letting her shadow her for a day. That has been a real example to me, but it's also something I've tried to do as well over the years.
Yeah.
Just have them come spend a day. Let's travel together. Nowadays, traveling around the world, it's often about sitting down, having a cup of coffee, or just making time. But there's been a few. I have two people in my life at the moment that I have an official mentoring relationship with, and I would like to continue to do that for a very long time. So it's taking the time. It's never been too busy, and it's given those opportunities to really see the authentic you, and never just say, "Oh yeah, this is how I did it." But one of my big lessons in mentoring is tell them how I screwed up.
Yeah.
Right. This is how I didn't do it. What do you learn from this?
Sure.
So yeah.
Andy, thank you. You've done. I really appreciate all the time that you've spent with us today. But as we close off, I want to give you an opportunity to just plug Canadian Foodgrains Bank and how people can engage with it, and perhaps even how people can get involved with it from a advocacy or volunteer basis as well. Just love to open that up for you.
Absolutely. And we are actually looking for people to come to Ottawa with us in October right now. If you go to our website, that's www.foodgrainsbank.ca. You can actually sign up, come to Ottawa with us in October, meet with MPs. We'll train you up on how to talk about the global food crisis. And also more than that, how to advocate. If you go to that website as well, you'll see lots of resources. For example, one we have at the moment is one that we just put together called Forced to Flee. It really talks about what it's like to be a refugee and the process that they go through and how that leads to some of the problems that they face, particularly around hunger. You can download that resource. You can use it in groups. You can teach yourself you can inform yourself about that. We talk about give, learn, pray, and advocate. And we love people to get engaged in that. You can, if you're in rural Canada, we have 215 nearly growing projects across Canada where people come together in their communities and grow a crop that then gets sold so that we can fund the response to the hunger crisis. We raise between $8 to $10 million a year on that. You can get involved in one of those. There are numerous ways in which you can engage with us. So go onto that website at foodgrainsbank.ca and do that, or contact us through social media. You'll see us at Foodgrains on Twitter. You can find us on the web. So we'd love to hear from you.
Awesome. That's great. Well, Andy, again, thank you. Thank you for your leadership in the sector. Thank you for all that you've done and for sharing a bit about your story today. We really appreciate it.
And thank you, Dave. And I just want to reiterate one thing I said. I am the least important person who's in this conversation. And I think that I work with an amazing team. I've always worked with amazing teams. Yeah. They're the ones that do the hard work. I just sit back and just watch them fly. So that's for me is what it's about. Appreciate you letting me be here today. Thank you.
Yeah, no, that's great. Awesome.